you do this to our family? After everything we've been through, how could you?
My name is Elena Morris, and last Christmas, something happened that shattered my faith in the word family. I'm 36 years old, a single mother, and for the last 8 years, my world has revolved around one person. My daughter, Lily. She's 9 now, with eyes like autumn honey and a laugh that still makes every difficult day worth enduring. I always believed that no matter how complicated life got, family was the one place where love was unconditional and where no one, especially a child, would ever feel unwanted. But last December proved how dangerously naive that belief was. The snow began falling early that year. I remember standing by the window of our small apartment, watching fat flakes settle softly on the sidewalks of Portland. Christmas lights were already twinkling on balconies across the street, and the air carried that unmistakable scent of cinnamon and wood smoke. Inside, Lily was decorating our modest tree, a second-hand one I'd bought at a thrift store, humming Silent Night off-key as she carefully hung ornaments shaped like gingerbread men. I'd saved for weeks to buy her a small gift, wrapped in gold paper under the tree. And despite the tightness of our budget, I felt proud. We didn't have much, but we had love. And in my mind, that was enough. For weeks, my sister and I had been texting back and forth about Christmas dinner. It was a long-standing tradition, one my parents insisted on keeping every year, a big family gathering at their suburban home, complete with a 12-foot tree, a table that could seat 20, and the familiar chaos of cousins running underfoot. It was the one day a year I promised Lily she'd feel part of something bigger than just the two of us. This year was supposed to be special. She'd even made a handmade card for Grandma and Grandpa, with tiny glitter hearts and a clumsy drawing of all of us sitting around the table together. Then, 3 days before Christmas, the message came. It was short, almost carelessly typed, from my mother. Dinner will be very full this year. Space is tight. Maybe next year you and Lily can join. At first, I thought I'd misread it. I stared at the screen, blinking, reading the words over and over, as if they might rearrange themselves into something else. Space was tight? In a house that could comfortably host 20 people? It didn't make sense. I called my mother immediately, my heart pounding. She sounded cheerful, almost detached, as if nothing were wrong. "We just have a lot of guests this year," she said. "You understand. Maybe it's better this way." Better this way. That phrase lodged itself somewhere deep inside me, colder than any winter wind. How could exclusion ever be better for a 9-year-old child? I tried to reason with her, to remind her that Lily had been looking forward to this for months. I even offered to bring our own chairs, to squeeze in wherever we could. But my mother brushed it off. "It's just not possible this year," she repeated, final and firm. When I told Lily, I did everything I could to soften the blow. I told her Grandma's house was going to be very crowded and that we'd have our own special Christmas, just the two of us. But children have a way of sensing the truth adults try to hide. Her eyes, so full of joy just hours before, dimmed in a way I'd never seen. She didn't cry, she just nodded quietly and went back to hanging the last ornament on our tree, a little felt angel with crooked wings. That night, after she went to bed, I sat alone on the couch, staring at the string of mismatched lights, blinking weakly against the window. My phone buzzed again, a family group chat filled with cheerful messages about who was bringing what dish, about the new cousin's baby, about the perfect seating arrangement. I wasn't included in any of it. It was as if Lily and I had been erased from the family altogether. I replayed the years in my head, the birthdays I'd never missed, the gifts I'd scraped together, the endless ways I'd tried to prove that being a single mother didn't make me less of a daughter or sister. And yet, here we were, cast aside as though we didn't matter. But the thing about heartbreak is that it doesn't always arrive with a scream. Sometimes it comes as silence, a chair left empty, a plate never set, a child's handmade card tucked away in a drawer instead of displayed on a mantel. And that silence is louder than any argument could ever be. In the days leading up to Christmas, I found myself questioning everything. Was it something I'd done? Was my daughter somehow an inconvenience? The more I tried to rationalize it, the clearer it became. This wasn't about logistics or space. It was about choice. My family had chosen to exclude us, and the people we love the most have the greatest power to wound us. Still, I smiled for Lily's sake. We baked cookies together and strung paper snowflakes across the apartment. We wrote a letter to Santa and left it by the window. I told her stories about the Christmases I'd had as a child, warm, noisy, full of laughter, and I promised her we'd make our own version of that, just the two of us. But deep down, I knew the truth. No matter how many lights we strung, no matter how much love I poured into that tiny apartment, it wouldn't erase the empty chair that should have been hers at the table. It wouldn't silence the question I saw in her eyes. Why weren't we good enough to be invited? And that question, that single heartbreaking question, would change the way I saw my family forever. Long before that cold December night, when my daughter and I were told there was no room for us, the cracks in our family had been quietly forming. Hairline fractures beneath the surface of holiday smiles and polite small talk. Looking back now, I can see them clearly, each one widening over the years until the foundation itself was too fragile to hold us. And though I didn't know it then, Christmas was only the breaking point, the moment when those fractures split wide open. Our family wasn't always like this. There was a time when Sunday dinners were sacred, when birthdays meant crowded living rooms and too much cake, and when the word family actually felt like a promise. My parents, Peter and Margaret, were the kind of people who believed in appearances. My father built a small but respected construction business from the ground up, and my mother prided herself on being the perfect hostess, the type who ironed napkins for dinner parties and coordinated Christmas tree ornaments by color scheme. They weren't unkind exactly. They were just conditional. Conditional with their affection, conditional with their support, conditional with their love. When I was growing up, it was always my younger sister, Caroline, who shone brightest in their eyes. She was the golden child, the straight-A student, the homecoming queen, the one who married a lawyer and bought a 5-bedroom house before she turned 30. I, on the other hand, was the one who took a different path. Translation: I fell in love too young, got pregnant at 27, and chose to raise my daughter alone rather than stay in a marriage that was slowly crushing my soul. My parents never said they were disappointed in me, but disappointment clung to every silence, every clipped phone call, every conversation that ended with, "Well, we hope you're doing your best." Caroline's life fit their mold, mine did not. And though they never openly excluded me, there were always subtle reminders of my place. The end seat at the dinner table, the forgotten invitation to a cousin's graduation, the lingering glances when I showed up without a wedding ring. Lily, sweet and oblivious, never noticed the tension. To her, Grandma's house was a magical place, with candy canes in glass jars and a tree that touched the ceiling. She adored her cousins and talked about them constantly, always asking when she could see them next. And I, desperate for her to feel included, went along with every invitation, even when it meant swallowing my pride and my resentment. But things started to shift a few years ago when Caroline had twins. Overnight, they became the center of every family gathering, the miracle babies, as my mother called them. Lily, once the only grandchild, suddenly faded into the background. I noticed it first at birthdays. My daughter's gifts grew smaller, less thoughtful. Her photos were missing from the holiday cards. Her name was sometimes forgotten when my parents spoke about all the grandkids. It wasn't malicious, not at first. It was just negligence, the kind that slowly erodes a child's confidence. I tried to bring it up once, gently, telling my mother that Lily felt left out. "Don't be so sensitive," she replied, laughing it off. "You know how kids are, she'll be fine." But she wasn't fine. I could see it in the way Lily clung to my leg at family dinners, in the way she tried harder and harder to impress her grandparents, showing them drawings, reciting poems, helping in the kitchen, only to be met with distracted smiles and absent-minded nods. By last November, the imbalance was impossible to ignore. Caroline announced that she and her husband were hosting part of Christmas Eve at their home before everyone moved to my parents' house for the main dinner. She sent a long email with instructions, who was bringing what time to arrive, even a dress code. My name wasn't on the list of contributors. Lily's name wasn't mentioned at all. When I asked Caroline if we should bring something, she hesitated. "Oh, I think Mom assumed you'd probably just come later, maybe after dinner," she said casually, like it was the most natural thing in the world. That was the first time I felt it, the creeping suspicion that we weren't just being overlooked, we were being phased out. Still, I held on to hope. I told myself families go through rough patches, that this was just about logistics, not love. I convinced myself that come Christmas Day, everything would fall into place, that Lily would still run through the halls with her cousins, that we'd still sit around the table laughing over bad jokes and burnt pie crusts. But there were other signs too, smaller, sharper ones. The group texts that excluded me, the subtle digs about my life choices slipped into casual conversation. The way my father once referred to Lily as your kid instead of our granddaughter. It was all leading somewhere, and deep down, I think I already knew where. The truth is, exclusion doesn't start with a locked door. It starts with little things, a forgotten invitation, a phone call that never comes, a photo album that quietly leaves you out. It creeps in slowly, like frost on a window, until one day you realize you're standing outside looking in. and by the time you see it clearly, you're already shivering. I tried to fight that frost. I tried to keep my daughter warm in the glow of family love I thought was still there. But it's hard to hold on to warmth when the people who are supposed to love you keep pulling away. And in their absence, something else began to take root. Something I didn't want to admit. Anger. Because behind all the excuses, all the polite dismissals and cheerful smiles, one thing had become painfully clear. To my family, Lily and I weren't just less important. We were optional. And when the holidays came, they finally proved it. The night before Christmas has always held a kind of magic for me. Even when I was a little girl, there was something sacred about it. The hush that fell over the neighborhood, the glow of windows lit by trees, the way the air seemed to hold its breath in anticipation of joy. I wanted Lily to feel that same magic, to have the same memories that had carried me through childhood. So even after my mother's message, "Space is tight, maybe next year," I clung to the illusion that we could still salvage something. On December 24th, the city was wrapped in a soft blanket of snow. Our apartment smelled of cinnamon and vanilla from the cookies Lily and I had baked earlier that day. She'd worn her red Christmas dress, the one with tiny white snowflakes stitched into the hem, insisting that Santa would want to see her looking her best. She set out a plate of cookies by the window, carefully placing a glass of milk beside them. And as evening settled in, she sat cross-legged on the rug, reading The Night Before Christmas aloud to her stuffed bear, Benny. It was almost enough to make me forget the ache beneath it all. Almost. Then my phone buzzed. It was a photo from Caroline, a group selfie of the whole family, already gathered at her house. Everyone was there, my parents, my cousins, Caroline's in-laws, even distant relatives I hadn't seen in years. The table behind them was long and overflowing, ham, roasted vegetables, champagne glasses clinking mid-toast, and there in the corner sat a high chair for her twins. 20 people and a high chair, but no room for us. "Wish you were here," the caption read. I stared at the screen for a long time, trying to decide if the message was meant to sting or if it was just obliviousness. Either way, it landed like a punch to the chest. Lily noticed my silence. "Mommy?" she asked softly, peeking up from her book. "Are they having dinner now?" I forced a smile, swallowing the bitterness that rose in my throat. "Yes, sweetheart," I said, my voice as steady as I could make it. "They're celebrating, and we're going to celebrate too, right here." But children, even young ones, have a sixth sense for pain. She didn't say anything more. She just turned back to her book, her little shoulders slightly hunched, her lips pressed into a thin line. And in that moment, I realized something I wish I'd understood sooner. A child's heartbreak isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet. It's in the way they stop asking questions, stop expecting, stop believing. Later that night, as I tucked her into bed, Lily asked a question I wasn't prepared for. "Mommy," she whispered, eyes wide and searching. "Did I do something wrong?" The words pierced me deeper than anything my family had ever said. "No, baby," I whispered, my throat tightening. "You didn't do anything wrong. You are perfect. Absolutely perfect. This isn't about you. It's about grown-ups who don't always make the right choices." She nodded, but I could tell she didn't believe me. How could she? children don't understand politics, grudges, or family pride. They understand only actions. And the message our family's actions sent was painfully clear. You don't belong here. After she fell asleep, I sat alone by the tree, staring at the soft, blinking lights. Outside, snowflakes danced in the glow of street lamps. Somewhere, a neighbor was playing "O Holy Night," and the music drifted through our walls, hauntingly beautiful and unbearably sad. I thought about calling my mother again, begging her to reconsider. I even typed out a message. "Please, this means so much to Lily. We'll sit anywhere. We'll bring our own chairs." But I deleted it before hitting send. I was done begging for scraps of belonging. Instead, I walked quietly into Lily's room. She was asleep, her tiny body curled beneath a blanket, patterned with reindeer. On the nightstand beside her was a letter she'd written to Santa. My eyes skimmed over the carefully printed words. "Dear Santa, I hope you have a safe trip. I don't need many presents this year. Maybe just a book or some art stuff. But if you can, could you help my family love me more? I think I might not be enough." I pressed the letter to my chest and cried. Silent, aching sobs that shook my whole body. Not because of what my family had done to me, but because of what they had done to her. Because their indifference had planted a seed of doubt in a little girl's heart, a seed that no child should ever have to carry. By the time dawn crept through our curtains, I had made a decision. If they didn't have room for us at their table, then I would build our own. It might not have a 12-foot tree or a turkey carved by my father's steady hands, but it would have warmth, it would have love, and it would have 2 chairs, one for me and one for the little girl who deserved so much more than this. But I also knew something else. The wound had been made. The question had been asked, and nothing, no number of cookies or presents or whispered reassurances, could erase the memory of a Christmas where the people who should have loved her most made her feel like a guest in her own family. The night before Christmas had always been magical. But that year, its magic was replaced by a lesson, a painful, necessary one. Sometimes, the people you expect to hold you closest are the ones who leave you standing in the cold. Christmas morning came quietly, almost too quietly, like the world itself was holding its breath. The snow was still falling outside, blanketing the streets in soft white silence. In the apartment, the heater hummed faintly, and the smell of cinnamon from last night's cookies still lingered in the air. It should have been comforting. But instead, the stillness felt heavy, like a weight pressing down on every corner of the room. I woke up early before Lily stirred and sat by the window with a cup of lukewarm coffee, watching as the city slowly came to life. Somewhere in the distance, church bells chimed. A few neighbors were already out, their laughter echoing as they carried brightly wrapped gifts to waiting cars. It was Christmas, a day meant for warmth and connection, for noisy breakfasts and crumpled wrapping paper and the comforting chaos of family. But for us, it was just another day in a too-quiet apartment. Lily padded into the living room, still in her pajamas, her hair a sleepy tangle, clutching Benny the bear under one arm. She smiled when she saw the small pile of presents under our tree. Nothing extravagant, just a couple of books, a sketch pad, and a box of colored pencils. Still, her eyes lit up, and for a moment, the heaviness lifted. "Thank you, Mommy," she whispered, hugging me tightly. "I love them." We sat together on the floor, unwrapping gifts and laughing at the silly doodles she immediately began to sketch. I had made pancakes, her favorite, and we ate them by the window while watching the snowflakes drift lazily past the glass. On the surface, it looked like a perfectly peaceful Christmas morning. But beneath it all was a hollowness that neither of us could ignore. Around noon, I received another photo. This time it was a video, a long table, clinking glasses, laughter spilling into the air. My parents were at the head, smiling proudly. Caroline's twins were shrieking with joy as they tore through mountains of presents. My cousins were singing carols. Everyone looked so happy. And again, not a single glance, not a single word, not a single acknowledgement that Lily and I even existed. I didn't show it to her, of course, but she saw the look on my face when I glanced at my phone. "Are they having dinner now?" she asked again, just like she had the night before. "Yes," I said softly, "they are." She was quiet for a long time. Then she walked over to the table where 2 plates were set, one for her, one for me, and stared at them. "Do you think they have a plate for me there?" she asked suddenly. The question caught me off guard. "What do you mean?" "Like a seat," she said, fiddling with the hem of her pajama top. "A place where I was supposed to sit? Or maybe they just forgot to put one out." I swallowed hard. "I think," I said carefully, "they just don't know how much they're missing." Her little lips pressed together as she nodded, pretending to understand. But the truth was, she did understand. Children always do. They understand absence in ways adults often refuse to. They feel it in the empty chair, in the silence after the phone doesn't ring, in the way the world keeps spinning as if they were never invited to be part of it. After lunch, she disappeared into her room. I gave her space, thinking she wanted to play or draw. But when I peeked in an hour later, I found her sitting by the window, watching snowflakes melt against the glass. Benny sat in her lap, and next to her was the plate of cookies she had left for Santa, now untouched. "Maybe Santa didn't come because he stopped at Grandma's first," she murmured. The ache that bloomed in my chest was unlike anything I'd ever felt. It wasn't just sadness, it was fury, helplessness, grief, all tangled together. Because how do you explain to a child that the people who should love her most chose not to? How do you make sense of rejection when it comes not from strangers, but from blood? That afternoon, I tried to distract her. We watched a Christmas movie. We built a snowman outside the apartment building. We even had hot cocoa with extra marshmallows. And yet, the silence followed us everywhere. Not the comforting silence of peace, but the sharp, echoing silence of absence. At one point, she turned to me and asked, "Do you think they'll call us next year?" I hesitated before answering. "I don't know, sweetheart," I said honestly, "but I do know that no matter what they do, you and I will always celebrate together." She smiled, a small, brave smile, and squeezed my hand. And in that moment, I made a quiet promise to myself. I would make sure Lily never felt this way again. I couldn't erase the hurt my family had caused, but I could teach her something more powerful. That family isn't just the people who share your blood. Family is the people who make room for you, even when there's none to spare. As the day faded into night, our little apartment glowed softly under the light of the Christmas tree. It was still quiet, still small, still just the two of us, but there was something sacred about that, too. In the emptiness left behind by others, we were building something new, fragile but real. And even though the silence still hurt, it was no longer just a void. It was a space waiting to be filled with love, with new traditions, with a future that didn't depend on being accepted by people who had already chosen to turn us away. Something shifted in me after that Christmas day. Maybe it was the sight of Lily's small hand tracing circles on the fogged-up window as she watched other families load into cars for their celebrations. Maybe it was the sound of laughter echoing from apartments above us, muffled and distant, like joy belonged to everyone else but us. Or maybe it was simply that I'd had enough of waiting for a phone call that never came, enough of explaining away cruelty as misunderstandings, enough of watching my daughter's light dim because people who shared our blood refused to see her worth. Whatever it was, something inside me hardened and awakened at the same time. If they didn't want us at their table, then fine. We would build our own, and not just for that day, but for every day after. The following morning, I made pancakes again. This time, not out of habit or tradition, but as a declaration. I told Lily we were going on an adventure. She looked confused. After all, Christmas was supposed to be over. But I packed a thermos of cocoa, bundled her in her red coat and boots, and we stepped out into the crisp winter air. The world was still, the sidewalks dusted with fresh snow, but I felt something new in my chest, a spark of purpose. We took the bus across town to a local community shelter I'd read about online. They were serving Christmas leftovers and warm meals to anyone who needed them. The homeless, the lonely, the forgotten. People society often called outsiders. The people who, like us, had no invitation. Inside, the smell of stew and fresh bread filled the air. Volunteers bustled about with trays and smiles, and families gathered at mismatched tables, sharing stories and laughter. It wasn't polished or glamorous, no crystal glasses or gold-trimmed centerpieces here, but it was real. And in that simplicity, I felt something that had been missing from my parents' world, genuine warmth. We signed up to help serve lunch. Lily carried cups of cocoa with both hands, her cheeks flushed from the cold, while I ladled soup into bowls. At first, she was shy, clinging to my side, but soon she was chatting with the older woman who sat alone by the window, asking questions about her knitted scarf and laughing at her stories. She helped a little boy her age find the dessert table, and together they giggled over the wobbly shapes of homemade cookies. By the time we were done, she was smiling, truly smiling, for the first time in days. On the way home, she tugged at my sleeve. "Mommy," she said, "this was better than going to Grandma's." "Why's that?" I asked, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Because everyone wanted us there." I nearly cried right there on the bus, because she was right. It wasn't the size of the house or the number of presents or the fancy decorations that made a family gathering special. It was the wanting, the deliberate act of choosing someone, of making space for them, of saying you belong here. And in that moment, I realized something vital. Exclusion doesn't define you. What defines you is how you respond to it. You can let it break you, or you can let it push you to build something better. That day we chose the latter. That winter, Lily and I started a new tradition. Every December 25th, no matter what, we'd spend part of the day volunteering, bringing meals, delivering gifts to local shelters, inviting neighbors without families to share dinner with us. It wasn't just about helping others, it was about reclaiming the holiday on our own terms. It was about refusing to let bitterness write the story for us. And slowly, something remarkable happened. That little apartment of ours, once so quiet and lonely, became a place of gathering. The following year, Mrs. Sanchez from downstairs joined us for dinner. She had lost her husband the previous spring. Then it was Jake, the college student in 3B, who couldn't afford a flight home. Then a single father and his daughter from the shelter, who'd become friends with Lily during our visits. Our table wasn't just ours anymore. It was a haven, a refuge, a family built not by blood, but by choice. I won't lie, there were moments I still felt the sting of exclusion. Like when my family posted their annual holiday photo, all smiles and champagne flutes, with no trace of us in sight. But those moments became quieter, less powerful. Because now, instead of standing outside looking in, I was inside something far more meaningful. And perhaps the most unexpected part of all was the way Lily changed. The little girl who once wondered if she wasn't enough grew more confident, more compassionate, more sure of her place in the world. She didn't just recover, she blossomed. And I realized that maybe, just maybe, that cruel Christmas had been a gift in disguise. It had taught her, and me, the most important lesson of all, that love isn't about being accepted. It's about choosing to give and receive it, even when others don't. We had been excluded from their table. But in the end, we built one bigger, warmer, and more welcoming than theirs could ever be. Time has a way of softening wounds, but it also has a way of revealing truths. In the months after that painful Christmas, I stopped waiting for invitations that never came. I stopped rearranging my schedule to fit into their plans. And perhaps most importantly, I stopped explaining myself to people who had already decided I wasn't worth understanding. Lily and I built a new rhythm, one that didn't revolve around their approval. And for the first time in years, I felt free. But life, as it often does, had plans of its own. It was about 3 years later when the phone call came. It was early November, and the trees outside our apartment were shedding their last golden leaves. I was cooking dinner when my phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. On the other end was Caroline. Her voice, once sharp and certain, was trembling. "Mom had a stroke," she said. "It's bad. She's in the hospital." For a moment, I couldn't speak. Despite everything that had happened, the exclusion, the cold silences, the years of being treated as an afterthought, hearing those words still knocked the air out of me. I felt a flood of conflicting emotions: concern, resentment, sorrow, confusion. She was still my mother, and yet she had been a stranger to me for so long. I took Lily with me to the hospital the next morning. The sterile smell of disinfectant hit us as soon as we stepped into the elevator. When we reached the room, I saw my father sitting by the bed, his hands trembling as he held my mother's. She looked smaller somehow, frailer, more human. The woman who once seemed unshakable now lay surrounded by machines that beeped softly in the background. Caroline was there too, exhausted and pale. When she saw me, tears welled in her eyes. "I didn't know who else to call," she whispered. And just like that, the roles had reversed. The family that once decided there was no room for us now needed us. My father asked if I could help manage their bills while he focused on my mom's recovery. Caroline begged me to stay overnight a few times so she could rest. They leaned on me, not because I had to be there, but because, deep down, they knew I was the only one who still would be. Lily, now 12, brought handmade cards to the hospital every visit. "I remember the cookies Grandma used to bake," she told her one afternoon. "Maybe we can bake them together when you get better." My mother's eyes welled with tears. She tried to speak but couldn't, her voice still fragile from the stroke. Instead, she squeezed Lily's hand, a small gesture, but one that spoke volumes. Slowly, painfully, the walls between us began to crumble. My parents started asking about our lives, about Lily's school projects, about the volunteering tradition we'd built. There was a humility in their questions now, a quiet acknowledgement of the years they'd missed. And while I didn't forgive them overnight, I did begin to understand something deeper. Sometimes the people who hurt you most don't realize the magnitude of the damage until life humbles them. Then came Christmas again, 4 years after that Christmas. This time it was my father who called. His voice was softer than I remembered. "We're having dinner," he said. "We'd like you and Lily to come. The table won't feel right without you." For a long moment, I just held the phone against my chest. Part of me wanted to refuse, to protect the peace we'd built for ourselves. But another part, the part that still believed in second chances, whispered that maybe this was what healing looked like. Not erasing the past, but choosing not to let it define the future. We decided to go. Lily helped me bake 2 pies, one for dessert, one as a peace offering. When we walked through the door, the house felt both familiar and foreign. The same twinkling lights, the same scent of pine. But this time there were 2 new chairs at the table, one for me, one for my daughter. And waiting beside them were place cards with our names written in careful cursive. During dinner, there was laughter. Awkward pauses too, but also warmth. My mother, still regaining her strength, reached across the table to take my hand. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "I should have made room a long time ago." I squeezed her hand back, my chest tight with a complicated mix of grief and relief. "You're here now," I said. "That's what matters." It wasn't a fairy tale ending. There were still scars, moments of lingering resentment, unspoken apologies that hovered in the air. But there was also progress, real, tangible progress. And as I watched Lily laughing with her cousins, the same ones who once barely knew her name, I realized that vindication doesn't always arrive with grand gestures or dramatic confrontations. Sometimes it's as simple as a chair pulled out and a place finally set. And here's the beautiful irony of it all. The family that once taught us the pain of exclusion now understood, more deeply than ever, the power of inclusion. They had come to realize what we had known all along, that love isn't measured by who deserves a seat, but by who you make space for. In the end, the table did turn. And when it did, it wasn't just about being invited back. It was about returning not as the forgotten ones, but as the ones who had built something stronger. Love without conditions, family without prerequisites, and a life that didn't need their approval to be whole. If you had told me 5 years ago that the same people who once told us there was no room at their table would one day beg us to come back, I wouldn't have believed you. At the time, the hurt ran too deep. It felt permanent, like a scar that would always ache when winter came. But life, I've learned, has a remarkable way of shifting the ground beneath your feet. Sometimes what once felt like a wound becomes a doorway. And sometimes the very moments that break you are the ones that build you into someone stronger. This Christmas, as I stood in the kitchen stirring cocoa, while Lily, now a teenager, strung lights around the window, I thought about that first Christmas alone. I thought about the silence, the empty plates, the tears I cried into my coffee after reading her letter to Santa. I thought about the ache of being forgotten, the humiliation of being treated as optional by people whose love should have been unconditional. And then I looked around at the mismatched chairs, the noisy laughter of friends turned family, the plate of cookies Lily had baked for the neighbors' kids, and I realized that we hadn't just survived that pain. We had transformed it. The truth is, exclusion leaves a mark. It doesn't vanish just because people apologize or because circumstances change, but it also doesn't have to define you. It can become a teacher, a harsh one, yes, but a wise one. It can teach you what not to accept, what not to become, and most importantly, what truly matters. For years, I believed that family was about bloodlines, about the people you were born to, the people whose names matched yours on a family tree. But I see it differently now. Family isn't about who shares your DNA. Family is the people who show up, the ones who make space, the ones who choose you not out of obligation, but out of love. And sometimes you have to go through the pain of being left out to understand just how precious it is to be chosen. Lily understands that lesson better than anyone. She's grown into a young woman who doesn't measure her worth by other people's acceptance. She's strong and empathetic, with a heart big enough to include those who once excluded her. And every year, without fail, she insists we continue our tradition, spending Christmas mornings serving meals, delivering gifts, and sharing time with those who might otherwise be forgotten. Last year, my mother came with us. It was her idea, actually. "I want to give back," she'd said quietly, "for all the times I took more than I gave." And so there we were, 3 generations, standing side by side, ladling soup, laughing with strangers, learning together that family is far more expansive than we ever believed. As the sun set that day, we returned home to a house that was no longer small or lonely. It was alive, filled with the scent of cinnamon and pine, the sound of music and laughter, the warmth of love chosen and nurtured. And when we sat down to dinner, our table was full, not just with food, but with stories, forgiveness, second chances, and new beginnings. If there's one thing I hope people take from our story, it's this. Kindness isn't just a nice idea, it's a responsibility. Inclusion isn't about space, it's about intention. And love isn't about perfection, it's about effort, over and over again, even when it's hard. The holidays are supposed to be about togetherness, but togetherness means nothing if it's not grounded in compassion. So if you're reading this and you know someone who's on the outside looking in, a neighbor, a coworker, even a relative you haven't spoken to in years, maybe this is the year you make room. Maybe this is the year you pull out an extra chair. Maybe this is the year you choose love over pride. Because I promise you this, it's not the fancy decorations or the perfectly cooked turkey that people remember. It's the feeling of belonging. It's the warmth of being wanted. And it's the quiet joy of knowing that there's always a seat for you. Not because you earned it, but because someone chose to make space for you. From my little family to yours, I hope this story stays with you. I hope it reminds you that healing is possible, that forgiveness can bloom in the coldest winters, and that the smallest acts of kindness can change the shape of someone's life. And above all, I hope it inspires you to build a table so big, so warm, so full of love that no one ever has, to wonder if there's a place for them. Thank you for listening to our story. I wish you and your loved ones health, happiness, and peace, not just during the holidays, but always. And if this story touched you, please don't forget to subscribe to our channel. There are so many more stories like this waiting to be told. Stories of heartbreak, hope, and the quiet power of choosing love.